I will attempt to talk to you about this book Wound, but talking about it, just like reading it, is a deeply personal experience. Let's give it a try. Wound by Oksana Vasyakina is the first installment of her now trilogy of autofiction. Wound talks about her mother, Steppe is about her father, Rose is about her aunt. I've read all three now. Wound is the one that I enjoyed most, so I will primarily talk about it, bringing up other books if relevant. You can read the first two. Rose hasn't been translated yet, as far as I know. I once again do not have a physical copy, and in Russian it's only available on pirate websites because it's out of print and I think shadow banned. Why, you would ask? Well, I will let Dan Stevens take this one.
Are you gay?
No, of course not. I'm Russian.
No?
There are no gay people in Russia.
And yeah, I think that's just it. I have no other explanation beyond it, because Vasyakina does talk about her being a lesbian, and we cannot have that now, can we? First of all, I need to mention how much I really loved reading the book, just like the process of reading it, how it was written, because once we get into the subject matter, it's going to be rather weird to say that I loved the book. Vasyakina's prose flows. It has a certain rhythm to it. She favors shorter sentences that are not always typical for the Russian prose, but it adds to the staccato rhythm of it. I full-on lost track of time reading it. It felt like you're swaying on gentle ocean waves. It kind of calms you. Vasyakina started as a poet, and I see that quality in her prose. It has this deep emotionality that merges with poignant visuals. Her metaphors are always timely and accurate. I feel like I need to mention it because just before it, I attempted another autofiction book, and I was hardcore struggling with that one. The prose felt clunky. The metaphors were really weird. There is one where she used something like a seal poking its head out of the water, and it still sticks with me because how out of place it was there. That book was The Disappearing Act by Maria Stepanova. We will see if I eventually can make it through. Vasyakina, on the other hand, doesn't have this problem, and good thing too, because the subject matter is a heavy one. At the core, it is Vasyakina working through her mother's passing. The entire book is framed within this rather mundane reality of dealing with the consequences of a person's passing, like going to the morgue, organizing the cremation, organizing the funeral and such. But through it, Vasyakina talks about her mother, the complicated relationship that they had, some grievances that she has with her, but also Vasyakina's own identity as a woman and how it was shaped by her mother. The book jumps back and forth between this recount of Vasyakina getting her mother's ashes and traveling with them to their hometown in Siberia to bury her there, and the memories of her mother, her own memories, her discovering her sexuality, her relationships with women, but also these essay-like paragraphs on the female experience in general and some poetry. So while the framework is in place, the narrative is not linear at all. It jumps back and forth, gets sidetracked or abandoned, but since it is autofiction, it works. In a sense, it feels like stream of consciousness, but all anecdotes, all asides, all essay-like paragraphs, they all speak on the main theme, this wound that was left by her mother's passing. It needs to be said that at the time of recording, both of my parents are still alive, although we're getting out there. But my point is that I've yet to experience the loss of a parent, so the book does hit me, but not in a devastating way. I feel like once I inevitably go through this, it's going to be a very different experience reading a book like this. Also, while my relationship with my folks is far from ideal, it's nowhere near close to what Vasyakina had to deal with. And while the minutiae of dealing with funeral homes or organizing a wake is not something that we deal on a daily basis, it is a universal experience, so it already establishes common ground. But also, every action and every event is so filled with emotion, with this presence and yet absence of a loved one. There is poignancy in Vasyakina clinging to the urn of her mother's ashes as she takes them all across country, but She also gets like 2 months with them before she arrives in Siberia. So it takes time to process and let go of her mother. And that's not even mentioning the time that they had before her passing. There is a certain desperation to Vasyakina here, as she wants her mother here, but maybe she needs to acknowledge that she never had her in the first place, or at least not in the way that she wanted. By the book's account, they had a very distant relationship, with Vasyakina constantly reaching out to her, trying to get that warmth and love from her, while getting very little in return. She portrays her mother as this beautiful woman first, who maybe wanted something else out of life rather than a daughter, but then she also falls in this codependency with rather abusive men who led her down the path of alcoholism and domestic violence. There is a rather chilling memory that Vasyakina brings up of one of her mother's abusive boyfriends climbing in through the balcony into the apartment, and the mother running away to her friends, leaving young Vasyakina with him. He didn't touch her, but this sense of dread and abandonment by her mother, a woman that should have protected her, led to severe mental health problems for the author down the road. Vasyakina frames it as she always had to fight for her mother's attention with these men, and the mother always chose her men. Vasyakina tries to understand her mother, though, what led her down this path. She sees this pattern in her of clinging to men and hating the women in the family all at the same time. Vasyakina expands on it a little bit in Rose, but even here, this entire maternal line, they all hate each other. They choose this terribly abusive men, but blame it on the women, or at least take it out on other women. So in a sense, it is generational trauma, passed-down behaviors, and absence of love. Vasyakina at one point compares herself to a weed that her mother threw to the ground, and that grew almost against her wishes. This tension of a daughter reaching out to a distant mother continues heartbreakingly until the very end, when the mother is diagnosed with late-stage cancer, and they are waiting for her inevitable end, and yet they still have nothing to say to each other. They spend the last days that the mother has watching pointless TV. And so when the mother dies, Vasyakina feels very little, while at the same time clinging to the urn of her ashes as if they're gonna provide some answers for her. Or at least as if she lets go, she would crumble too. The book ends with a series of questions, rhetorical in some sense, that Vasyakina directs at her mother, that she never gets answers to, building nicely on this theme of silence that she received from her mother. The book is this attempt to reconstruct what her mother meant to her, what she gave to her, what parts of her Vasyakina still carries inside of herself, and what made her into the woman that she is now. And thanks to all that the mother has given to her, and despite some grievances that they had, Vasyakina ends the book with a proclamation of love for her mother, because she believes that she would have understood her in the end, because they are the same in some sense. This relationship with her mother is at the foundation of Vasyakina's own identity as a woman and her relationship with other women. Vasyakina throughout her life felt less than. While her mother was this womanly woman, Vasyakina always felt bereft. This shaky sense of identity is reflected in the mental illness that she lives with, and she explores it a little bit in the book, but mostly it has to do with her romantic and sexual relationships. There is this messy yet authentic account of her self-discovery, the shame that she felt over her sexuality, her first relationships with women that were not at all romantic and often not that pleasurable, the stigma that queer people face, sometimes even in queer spaces, especially in the 2010s Russia. It all felt very real and important to talk about, and not because it is not often talked about, especially in Russian prose. I fully laughed at the comment that was left on Steppe, where they accused Vasyakina of bringing up her queer identity as an attention-seeking move, as if being queer was ever favorable or fortune-bringing here in Russia. I found it all moving, and the story does have a happy ending, because Vasyakina does find a wife that she loves and cherishes, so it was not all for naught. I should probably mention that she also has this psychosexual thing going on. As she discovers her sexuality, she ties it to her mother and her passing. It can be rather uncomfortable to read, but at the same time, Vasyakina believed that it was needed to tell her story, so I'm not gonna sit here and decide how necessary it truly was. I just feel like I need to give you a warning here. Vasyakina is as open about her sexual identity as she can be in a book like this. She brings up those experiences not in full graphic detail, but she gets the reader up close and personal. The book was rated 18 plus, and that's probably fair. Overall, I found the book a moving account of a woman trying to understand her own identity as a woman through her relationship with her mother. There is a lot of detail that I obviously didn't cover, and in a book like this, it is rather important because it builds this puzzle of a person's life. For a bit, I was worried that some of the realities of life might be too Russian for a foreign audience to relate to. And yes, she brings up anecdotes and details that are very much Russia culture coded. But at the same time, yes, it is a story of a rural Siberian small town, but there are so many places all over the world that are quite similar to that, so you should be able to understand and relate to it without needing a travel guide. The book works. There is something in there that resonates with me. Vasyakina and I are vastly different people, despite us being almost the same age, with vastly different experiences. But at the same time, there is enough overlap in general human experience that makes me relate to her. Autofiction, while not my favorite genre, allows us this glimpse into other people's lives and see ourselves reflected in them. There is enough I recognize in her for me to relate without it being personal to me. I would also say that despite these heavy topics that Vasyakina brings up, I never felt like she was relishing in it or doing it for shock value. All of these nasty, disturbing instances that she brings up, they are all there to tell her story and potentially for her to work through them. I don't remember what I said exactly in my video on It's the End of the World, My Love by Alla Gorbunova, but that book also has autofiction in it, and I truly felt the darkness of that sick past of hers, like she was trying to drag me into the mud with her. Here, Vasyakina is looking for that light at the end of the very dark tunnel, so the book doesn't feel depressing or grim. There is hope that she's trying to find. And yes, I cried at the end, but it felt cathartic. The very first note that I made as I was reading the book was, this book is gonna make you feel things. They're not always going to be the prettiest of things, but you will feel them. And I feel like it's true for this book. A book like this relies on your emotional response, if you can emote, if you can relate, if you are willing to go on this emotional journey along with the author. And if you do, you will not be left unmoved. Although, to be fair, I would imagine that women are gonna get much more out of this book. I do not know if male readers will find it particularly relatable. A few words on Steppe and Rose. I felt that these two books were weaker. It's partly determined by the connection being weaker with her father and aunt rather than with her mother, and it felt like she had less to say, so it led to repetition and almost inconsistencies. If you look at Steppe, Vasyakina is trying to find some connection to her father, especially since, as all loving mothers do in moments of anger, she told Vasyakina that she is just like her father. The father, deadbeat dad that he was full of vices. In the 90s, he was part of the gang that provided some nice stuff for the family while the country as a whole was struggling, but it also landed him in prison and reframed his mindset into this thieves' code. Eventually, he had to run away across country to avoid another sentence, and he became a truck driver. He was a raging alcoholic, did hard drugs, and eventually died of AIDS. In the book, Vasyakina depicts this moment of reconciliation between them when she was about 20 years old, and he took her on one of those drives across country in his truck. The feeling that permeates this book is her shame. She is very much ashamed of him, of the way that he is, of the way that he dresses, the way that he speaks, that he drinks, and she's also ashamed of being ashamed. This feeling never goes away and is reinforced by multiple episodes. But then we get to the end of the book, and she details an episode from her childhood when the father found out about the mother cheating, and what he did to her afterwards was terrifying. And so Vasyakina comes out of that episode feeling fear for her father. And that's how the book ends, with this feeling of fear. What slightly confuses me here is that she's taken these road trips with him, not once, but on multiple occasions. And maybe as an adult, she tried to rationalize this fear away, since it's also unclear when her mother told her what the father actually did to her, which was horrendous. But at the same time, the fear first came when she was a child, so something is not adding up here. I don't think that I would take a road trip with an estranged father for whom I felt this type of fear, no matter what questions I'm trying to answer here. Rose, I felt, was weakest. It is about her aunt, the younger sister of her mother, who at 15 years old had to take care of the baby Vasyakina. The aunt, Svetlana, continues in this wonderful tradition of promiscuous behavior and choosing very violent, abusive sexual partners. But the main theme of the book is this subtle hatred that the women in the family feel for each other. How the aunt and her mother, Vasyakina's grandmother, lived their entire lives together, but with this constant hate and fear of each other. This theme of dysfunctional family dynamics is brought up in Wound and expanded here in Rose, but I still feel like I needed more. There is also this second theme of Svetlana dying from tuberculosis and the stigma and shame that comes from the disease, and how it was viewed by everybody as a punishment for her behavior. It feels a little redundant and a rehash of a father's plot, which is a very weird thing to say about autofiction. Both AIDS and tuberculosis are heavily stigmatized to this day even, and were even more so in the 2010s, so it is an important subject that she brings up. But since it was already a plot point in Steppe, I maybe would have wanted her to focus more on these relationships between the women in the family, especially since the AIDS plot hits harder, I think. There is a moment that stuck with me in Steppe when Vasyakina talks about her father's new woman, and she starts this part of the book by saying, like, she was trapped in this relationship. Then she spends a couple of paragraphs describing this relationship, maybe not as pure and full of love as one would hope, and then she repeats the same sentence. She was trapped in this relationship. My father gave her AIDS, and so both of them believed that it was fatal and they were on borrowed time. Like, oh my God. And yeah, it was a powerful commentary on people dealing with AIDS, both those who have contracted the disease, but also people around them. I should also probably mention that Rose is tonally different. It looks like it was written in 2022, after the event that shook all of our lives, so maybe the author's mental state was not in a good space for her to write an uplifting book. I came out of Wound pensive, yes, but not brought down. I felt the tenderness that Vasyakina applied to these heavy subjects. I came out of Rose completely drained. It's darker, it's foggier, the author is trying to find her way out of this darkness that surrounds her, and I felt like she found it in Wound, but maybe lost it with Rose. Vasyakina has another few books published since then. I've added them to my TBR, but I feel like I need to take a moment, to take a breather, and just live with these books for a little while before I get to those. But I do sincerely recommend that you give Wound a try. Even if it's not a book for you, it's fine, but if it is, then it's definitely worthy of a read.